My wife preferred to go to a couple's event with her boss rather than with me, and when she saw me there, standing in the same room, she froze. The wine glass in her hand trembled, her rehearsed smile vanished, her eyes avoided mine and tried to hide behind the glass, as if it were possible to undo what had already been done. I didn't say a word. I just turned my back. I left her with the silence she chose. And it was there, in that fraction of a second between the look of surprise and the absence of reaction, that I understood, the love we had no longer existed. It had died before I even realized it. I was just the last to know. In the days that followed, the phone rang. Messages arrived. Short voices, restrained pleas, desperate attempts to go back without admitting her mistake. But the mistake was already written, imprinted in the way she ignored me, how she replaced me, how she undid me. I had already closed it off internally. The pain had already done the dirty work of burying everything we were, and now she was talking to an empty man who just wanted to move on. And I moved on. I rebuilt myself in silence. I found peace in the little things, rebuilt my routine, relearned to like myself. And it was during this time that I met someone. Someone who didn't hesitate, who chose me with both feet firmly on the ground. Someone who, unlike her, never made me feel like a second-rate option. But before that, there was one night. That night. The night of the event, when she arrived with her boss, and thought I wouldn't be there. She looked stunning, I admit. Not as a compliment, but ironically. Her outfit matching his, her gestures coordinated, as if they had rehearsed their roles as a couple for that occasion. She didn't expect to see me. Not with another couple of friends. Not smiling. Not calm. And when our eyes met, she froze. Maybe she thought I would yell. That I would demand explanations. But the silence was the loudest scream she could receive. I withdrew like a stranger. Because that's what she had made of me, a stranger in the life I had built with her. Before the betrayal, there was a marriage. A real one. Imperfect, like any other, but ours. A story made of details, of lazy Sundays, of summer plans, of promises made with eyes locked. I won't pretend it was all magical. But it was real. And, above all, it was reciprocal. Until it wasn't. Because one day she started coming home later from work. She started laughing with her phone in her hand and hiding the screen when I approached. She started talking about her boss with a sparkle in her eyes. And the sparkle that was once mine, went out. There was a day when I asked her directly if something was wrong. She said no. That I was imagining things. That she was just tired. That I was being insecure. And I wanted to believe her. Because we always want to believe when we love. But the body doesn't lie. Her touch grew colder. Her kisses more automatic. Her "I love you" more distant. And inside, I knew. Something had died. And she didn't have the courage to bury it with me. She buried it with someone else. After the event, she tried to reach me. She called, texted, said she wanted to talk. She said it was a mistake, that it was just one night, that the boss meant nothing. But I knew he meant something. Because nobody abandons a marriage for nothing. She only realized what she had lost when she saw me leaving without saying a word. Because I was the only one, in the whole story, who acted with dignity. She lost herself. I didn't. And in the midst of the chaos, she was the one left without a foundation. Because that boss, so full of charm and promises, quickly showed what he was, a convenient fling. An inflated ego that crumbled at the first sign of emotional involvement. When she started talking about feelings, he began to distance himself. And when she found herself alone, she tried to come back. But time had already done the work that love couldn't. I wasn't the same anymore. There was no longer room in me for the past. I had scars. And they hurt. But they were healed. And it was in this new time, in this space of reconstruction, that I met someone who looked at me as if I were enough. Not perfect, but chosen. And that's worth more than any fleeting passion. She came looking for me again. Months later. She came with tears in her eyes, trembling lips, a broken voice. She asked for forgiveness. She said she didn't know what she was doing. That she was weak. That she acted impulsively. That she didn't want to lose me. And maybe, in a parallel universe, I would have fallen again. But at that moment, no. Because what she destroyed wasn't just a marriage. It was trust. It was the image I had of her. And the image she had of me. I forgave her. Yes. Not for what she deserved, but for what I needed. Because holding a grudge would keep me trapped. And I wanted freedom. Peace. A fresh start. Today, she lives with the memory. I, with the serenity of someone who went all the way for love, was betrayed by the one I least expected, and still managed to get back up. She sees me sometimes. From afar. With my new wife. And with my son. She sees my smile. The same smile that was once hers. And I know what goes through her head. Because I've been there. She misses me. She regrets it. She wonders what it would have been like if she had chosen differently. But life isn't a book that can be rewritten when we make mistakes. It's a train that passes by, and if you get off at the wrong station, it doesn't come back. I walked towards my peace. It remained stuck in regret. But the question that echoes, even after everything, even after the pain, the grief, the silence, is just one. Did she betray me out of love, or out of cowardice? And that's the answer, maybe even she doesn't know. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal will never be romanticized or justified. All stories are fictional, but the feelings they evoke are real. Our goal is to show, without masks, how betrayal can destroy lives, homes, and true love. Prepare to feel. To reflect. And to hear a shocking story that will stir everything within you. Enjoy the story. Her name was Emily, his, Daniel. Two simple names, but laden with a story that began when both still harbored raw dreams and an almost childlike faith that love was enough to sustain everything. They met in a bookstore, during a rainy late afternoon, when they both reached for the same copy of a classic romance novel. They exchanged shy smiles, the kind that say more than words, and right there, without a script or intention, something began. It was as if the universe had gently pushed them towards each other with a silent, yet unerring delicacy. In a short time, casual encounters turned into long conversations, endless coffees, and hands that sought each other effortlessly. There were no games, no insecurities, just two young people who allowed themselves to experience what seemed to grow naturally between them, a sincere, pure love, without armor. Daniel was the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. He had a rare calmness in his gaze, a firmness in his gestures that conveyed security without needing to raise his voice. He worked in software development and, although not outgoing, knew how to be present. Emily fell in love with that. With the way he remembered the little details, how he offered silence at the right moments, how he made coffee every morning before she woke up, even on days when he himself was exhausted. Emily, in turn, was vibrant, full of plans, ambitious without losing her sweetness. She had a restless gaze, always wanting more from life, and an ability to transform the ordinary into something special. She worked in the marketing department of a rapidly growing company, and even with the challenges of the routine, she didn't let that dim the brilliance of what they were building together. She took care of the details, decorated the house with small personal touches, wrote handwritten notes and left them scattered around the house. It was that kind of love, light, meticulous, constant. The two built a life together little by little, respecting each other's time and boundaries. They lived in a modest apartment, but one full of meaning. The bookshelf with books from their first date, the wall of photos of trips and simple moments, the plants that kept dying and that they stubbornly replanted. Nothing was excessively planned, but everything seemed to make sense. Weekends were dedicated to short walks, old movies, cooking together, and making plans that sometimes never came to fruition, but which created an even stronger bond between them. When they argued, and they did argue, because they were human, there were tears, silence, but also reconciliation. The kind of reconciliation that comes from maturity, from the will to continue, from the certainty that it's worth adjusting course so as not to lose sight of the destination. Friends saw them as a model couple, not for what they posted, but for the way they looked at each other in silence. There was mutual admiration, and a complicity built on the basis of shared experiences, not idealization. Daniel was the harbor. Emily was the wind. And somehow, it worked. They complemented each other, even when they seemed to be moving at different speeds. When Emily was promoted and started working with new clients and new responsibilities, Daniel was the first to celebrate. He encouraged her, even if it meant seeing her more tired, more distant at times. He understood her effort and respected it. She, though always busy, made sure to keep their rituals alive: pizza on Friday nights, shared coffee on Sundays, midday messages with a memory or inside joke. There was a mutual effort, a daily choice. A relationship built not only on feelings but on conscious decisions. And that, for Daniel, was love. Despite her intense involvement with work, Emily always maintained that sparkle in her eyes whenever she spoke of Daniel to her friends. She said he was her home, her safe place. The only one who made her feel she could be vulnerable without fear. They protected each other. They were partners in pain, in laughter, in small failures and silent victories. Even in silences, there was communication. They knew when the other needed space, and that never meant distance. It was respect. It was maturity. It was the kind of relationship many idealized, but few managed to sustain in practice. There was effort from both. Neither carried the other alone. They walked side by side, with steps that sometimes went out of sync, but always found each other again. Time passed. For years together. Job changes, trips, losses, new friends, stressful periods. Life happening as it does for everyone. But the bond between them seemed unbreakable. Daniel continued to be the silent support, the right shoulder on bad days, the presence that didn't demand, it was simply there. Emily continued to seek to grow, to conquer, to expand. Sometimes, she forgot about herself in the process, and it was Daniel who reminded her to stop, breathe, rest. They balanced each other, even with all their differences. And that made the relationship something alive, real, palpable. A love that matured along with them. That went from the initial enchantment to something more solid, denser, deeper. There were plans for the future. Not necessarily a wedding with flowers and pomp, but a home. A further step. A construction that made sense for both of them. They talked about buying a bigger house, maybe moving to another city, adopting a dog, even having children someday. These conversations arose naturally, without pressure, like those who dream together. Like those who imagine themselves by each other's side for another decade, or two, or a lifetime. The security was there. It wasn't said all the time, but it was felt. In the details. In the small gestures. In the daily repetitions that form a lasting love. But what is solid is not always immune to the invisible wear and tear of small oversights. Sometimes, love remains alive, but dormant. Not for lack of feeling, but because of the tightening routine, the blinding haste, the outside world calling louder. Emily began to dedicate more hours to work. New projects, new challenges, new faces. Daniel, understanding, tried to maintain the balance of the home alone on the days she couldn't be there. He never demanded, never required anything. He only supported her. He saw the tiredness in her eyes and preferred to remain silent, cook something light, leave the kitchen light on so she wouldn't arrive in the dark. But, little by little, something began to change. The time they spent together decreased. The conversations became shorter. The silences began to bother them. It wasn't a fight. It was absence. It was the kind of distance you don't notice immediately, but when you do, it's too late. And even so, he continued. He remained present, believing it was just a phase. That it would soon pass. That she just needed support. That everything would return to normal. Because when you love, you choose to believe. Emily, on the other hand, was increasingly immersed in a new routine. She met new people. She spent more time away. She came back tired, disconnected, distant. Sometimes, Daniel tried to start a conversation. He asked how her day was, what she wanted for dinner, if she wanted to watch something together. She would answer with a tired smile, later, I'm sleepy. And he understood. As far as he could. As far as the silence didn't begin to hurt more than the absence. There was still love. But love alone isn't enough to sustain everything. It required presence, commitment, choice. And that, little by little, began to unravel between them. Not out of bad intentions, but due to the accumulation of small disconnections that, together, began to form an abyss. Daniel couldn't have imagined, at that time, that things could change so drastically. He still believed in what they had. He still looked at her with hope. He still thought it was just a phase. That she would come back to him, to the two of them, to what they had built together. He was a man of faith, not in a religious sense, but an emotional one. He believed that love, when true, was stronger than the chaos outside. And so, he continued. He continued serving coffee, waiting at the door, remembering dates, taking care of the details. Because that's how he loved. And he truly believed that she would see that. That she would understand. That she would come back. But the heart doesn't always follow the righteous path. Those who care aren't always remembered. Love isn't always enough to keep someone close. Still, Daniel was there. Waiting. Believing. Loving. And on the other side, Emily was already starting to change her ways. The rain fell lightly that gray afternoon, as if the sky itself reflected the weight that hung over them both. Daniel walked slowly, his heart calm, but not cold. Enough time had passed for the pain to have transformed into a memory, and the memory into a lesson. Emily waited for him, standing under the awning of a cafe, hugging herself as if trying to protect herself from the wind or from herself. When he approached, she raised her face with a mixture of relief and nervousness, and her gaze was an entire ocean of regret. Daniel stopped before her, his umbrella still dripping, and for a moment the world seemed to shrink to the space between them. She took a deep breath, and her voice came out trembling, laden with a weariness that time did not disguise. She said she needed to talk, that there were things that had been stuck in her throat for too long, that she could no longer continue without asking for forgiveness. He nodded, unhurriedly, his gaze serene but distant, as if he already knew that the conversation would not change the past. She began by talking about the emptiness that came after he left, the silence of the house, the loneliness that screamed between the walls. She said she thought time would heal, but that time only amplified the echo of regret. She said she tried to move on, that she tried to find in other people the same peace she had with him, but everything sounded artificial, forced, soulless. The tears came, slow, sincere. Daniel watched her attentively, but without intervening. The sound of the rain mingled with her voice, creating a sad, almost poetic melody, as if the universe wanted to provide a soundtrack to the approaching confession. Emily hesitated for a moment, and then let slip the secret she had been carrying in silence. She had seen him. Not just once. Several times. Without him knowing. She watched him from afar, walking with a sweet-eyed woman, holding hands, smiling lightly, serenely, as he never smiled again with her. And it was in that instant, seeing him happy with another, that she understood what she had lost. Her words crumbled between sobs and pauses. He said that the first time she saw him with his new wife, she thought about running away, but she stayed. She stood on the sidewalk, watching the man who had once been hers walk peacefully, without the shadow of the pain she had left behind. He said it hurt more than any punishment he could imagine, because there was nothing that could be done. It was the kind of pain that doesn't ask permission, that just happens. Emily confessed that she had thought about looking for him many times, but she held back because she knew he had moved on, and that any attempt at reconciliation would only be another open wound. Even so, she did it that day because she needed to say, even if too late, how much she regretted everything. Daniel listened with a disconcerting serenity. There was no anger in his gaze, nor pity. It was the look of someone who had already forgiven without needing to hear apologies, someone who had learned to let go of what he could no longer hold on to. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but firm. He said that he too had gone through dark days, nights when the silence seemed to scream, moments when he wondered what he had done wrong. But with time, he understood that love doesn't die, it just changes places. And that the love he felt for her had transformed into gratitude, gratitude for the good days, for the lessons learned, and even for the pain, because it was she who taught him to rebuild himself. Emily lowered her gaze, her hands trembling, her face wet with tears and rain. She murmured that she saw him smiling, and that it was like receiving an unexpected blow. That smile showed everything she had destroyed with her own hands. Daniel sighed, looking away at the wet street. He said yes, that he had found someone. That it was different. That with this new woman, he had learned that true love is not what suffocates, but what embraces. That loving is not living on memories or expectations, but on presence. Emily interrupted him, her voice choked with emotion, asking if he still thought about her. He remained silent for a few seconds, and then replied, I do think about her, but not in the way you imagine. I think about her like someone remembering a life that has already ended, a book that was important, but that has already reached its conclusion. Her face crumbled in pain. He tried to smile, but the smile shattered before it could form. She said that sometimes she still dreams of him, that in her dreams everything returns to how it was, and that waking up is the punishment. Daniel watched her with a mixture of sadness and understanding. He wanted to say that you too have dreamed many times, but over time the dreams have changed face, scenery, meaning. That today you dream of the future, no longer of the past. Emily took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling in agony, and confessed that she had spent months trying to understand the reason for everything, trying to convince herself that she had made the right choice, until she realized that it wasn't the love that had ended, it was she who had lost herself. Daniel looked at her with compassion and replied that perhaps life is made of this, of people who come to teach us something, even in the most painful way possible. He said he held no anger, that there was no more room inside him for resentment, that she could move on in peace because he had already done so a long time ago. Emily, her voice almost a whisper, said she didn't know how to go on, that nothing made sense anymore, that everything seemed to have frozen the day he turned his back and left. Daniel took a deep breath, ran a hand through his wet hair, and calmly replied that meaning isn't found by looking back. He said that every day he too had to choose to continue, even when he didn't want to. That forgiveness isn't forgetting, but accepting what cannot be changed. The silence between them grew heavy. The rain now fell harder, as if trying to wash away the last words that still lingered in the air. Emily tried to hold back her tears, but they escaped without permission. She said that if she could go back in time, she would have done everything differently. Daniel looked at her for a long moment and replied that we would all say that if time gave us the chance. But time doesn't go back. It moves on. And those who don't move with it are left behind. She lowered her gaze, her body trembling. She said that the hardest part wasn't losing him, but losing his gaze, that gaze that once made her feel unique, safe, loved. Daniel replied gently that that gaze now belonged to someone else, and that this was good, because it meant that the love still existed within him, it had only changed its destination. Emily nodded, swallowing hard. She said she had seen him again, days before, walking with his new wife and young son. She said she had watched from afar, and when she saw him smile at the boy, she felt something she had never felt before, a regret so profound it felt like punishment. She said it was at that moment, seeing his life continue in peace, that she understood there was no greater punishment than knowing she had destroyed something that would never return. Daniel listened in silence, without interrupting. She finished by saying that now she understood what true love was, because only those who truly love feel the weight of having lost forever. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the rain, the hurried footsteps of the people, the cold wind, everything seemed to fade away. Daniel then said that she should live, even with the regret. That she should learn to forgive herself, because continuing to punish herself would bring nothing back. Emily, with tears in her eyes, replied that his forgiveness was the only thing she still wanted to hear. He nodded, approached slowly, and said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "I forgive you." But forgiveness is not an invitation to return. It's just the way I found to move on without weight. She closed her eyes, and tears came like heavy rain. He walked away, calmly strolling down the wet street. Emily stood there, watching him disappear among the people, and finally understood that this was the true end. That there was no turning back, no words that could rebuild what had been destroyed. And it was there, alone, with the distant sound of traffic in her heart in pieces, that she felt the weight of her own karma, watching the man who once loved her in every possible way walk towards a full life, a life where she no longer fit. Time continued its course as it always does, indifferent to human suffering, and the seasons changed one after another as each person dealt with the wreckage left behind. After that last conversation, Daniel never looked back again. Not because there were no memories, but because he chose to live where the sun rose, not where the shadows dwelt. The days passed, and his routine gained new meaning, new rituals, new smiles. The woman by his side, the one who had chosen him from the beginning, brought a different kind of calm, not because she was better or worse, but because she didn't demand daily proof of love to stay. She understood the value of shared silence, of simple touch, of fidelity in small gestures. Together, they built not just a life, but a refuge. A place where the past was respected, but did not reign. He learned, by her side, that mature love is less about intensity and more about consistency. Their son grew up in a home full of presence. There were no unexplained absences, no empty promises. Daniel learned to be a father with a devotion born from the pain he carried. He knew the value of a firm presence, of a promise kept, of a daily gesture of affection. His son grew up with the certainty that love is not a fleeting feeling, but a decision renewed day after day. In the boy's eyes, Daniel saw the future. A future where he would not be remembered as the man who was betrayed, but as the man who survived the pain without ceasing to love. The past became just a part of his story, not its center. Emily, however, was not so lucky. The days following that encounter were like a plunge into cold, dense waters. Every morning, she woke with the same emptiness in her chest, and the same question that insisted on hurting, what if? The world around her moved on, but inside her everything seemed paralyzed. The image of Daniel walking in the rain, walking away without looking back, remained etched in her mind like a silent punishment. She tried to cling to work, to distractions, to new relationships, but everything was pale, shallow, colorless. No hug offered the comfort she once knew. No kiss tasted like home. Friends gradually drifted away. Not out of judgment, but because no one knows exactly how to deal with someone trapped in regret. She isolated herself. She began to avoid places she frequented with Daniel, stopped answering messages, and refused invitations. The house where she lived seemed increasingly empty, as if the objects knew what had happened there. At night, she would sit in the living room, staring at the switched-off television, mentally reliving every moment when she could have done things differently. Her punishment didn't come in the form of explicit pain, but in the form of absence. Absence of meaning, of hope, of true love. There was a night, months later, when she tried to write a letter. Not to give to Daniel, but to free herself. She tried to put into words what she felt, what she had destroyed, what was left. The page was wet with tears before she could even finish. It was like trying to explain the inexplicable. How to justify the unjustifiable. She tore up the letter, and with it, she tore up another part of herself. Every day, she felt as if she were paying for a choice that seemed small at the time, but that took away everything that had value. There was no going back. And she knew it. Life doesn't offer rewritten chapters, only hard lessons for those who refuse to listen to their hearts when they still beat for someone. Daniel didn't wish for her suffering. He never had. But he also no longer felt responsible for healing her. He had fulfilled his role. He had loved, cared, forgiven. Now, it was time to live. His wife understood this. She was never a replacement. She came to build, not to fix. With her, Daniel understood that life offers new beginnings, but demands courage to accept them. Together they learned to value truth, clarity, and the daily choice to remain by each other's side. There were no more hidden fears, no disguised insecurities. What existed between them was light and profound, like the water of a calm river after a storm. Years passed. Daniel published a book, not as a professional writer, but as a man who needed to put into words everything he had lived through. The book spoke of love, of loss, of silent rebuilding. It became a must-read for many who, like him, tried to start over after an emotional earthquake. Emily read it. She bought it at the bookstore where they met. She read each page as one travels a road they already know, but can no longer walk. She cried. Not from anger, nor from longing. She cried with the full awareness that she had been loved as few are. And that she had destroyed that love for something that didn't last. For the first time, she didn't try to justify herself. She simply accepted it. She knew that that love was no longer hers. It belonged to the world. It belonged to history. It belonged to another woman, another time, another destiny. Daniel never responded to messages that came afterward. She tried again, years later, wanting only to know how he was. He saw the messages. He didn't reply. Not out of pride, but because there was nothing left to say. The silence, the same silence that had hurt so much one day, was now the only possible answer. A mature, clean, resolved silence. Emily went on living. She tried to find meaning in other areas of life. She went to therapy. She started working with social causes. She helped other women, talked about regret, about choices, about how easy it is to lose yourself. Her pain became a bridge to other pains. And that, in some way, was what remained. A kind of personal redemption that didn't bring Daniel back, but at least made her feel that she could still be useful, that she could still rebuild herself, even if alone. Daniel grew old with peace in his heart. He watched his son grow with pride, looked at his wife with gratitude, and even when memories surfaced, and they did, there was no bitterness. There was understanding. There was maturity. He knew that life doesn't reward those who love the most, but those who love the best. And he had done that. He had loved with devotion, with truth, with dignity. And that is why, even after the fall, he rose stronger. Now that you've made it this far, we want to know, what did you think of this story? What was the moment that most impacted you? Comment below and share your opinion with us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue receiving stories that touch, move, and make you reflect. This story reminds us of a profound truth: betrayal doesn't just destroy a relationship, it breaks something much more delicate: trust, respect, a carefully built history. A moment of selfishness can cost a lifetime of love. There is no victory in betrayal. Only loss. And regret always comes. But it doesn't always find someone waiting on the other side. This channel does not support any kind of betrayal. Our stories are fictional, but they reflect real pain. May they serve as a warning, a lesson, a mirror. Until the next story.